Welcome to the unseen world, where whispers from the past and shadows of the unknown merge to unveil mysteries that defy explanation. Today, we embark on a journey through the veiled corners of reality, narrated through the experiences of those who have encountered the inexplicable. From the eerie hills of Kentucky to the ancient homes of the UK, from the silent graveyards to the echoes of the unseen, each tale invites you to question the line between the living and the spectral. So, dim the lights, let the candle flicker, and prepare to explore the realm where the paranormal breathes life into the silence of the night. Are you ready to step into the unknown? Story 1. So, I was living with my ex-GF in Kentucky, near the mountains. And about twice a week she would go outside with her family, sit on the porch in the dead of night, and just keep watch. I finally asked her what was going on by the third time, and it was to keep the Wendigo and the like away. Now, fast forward about 5 months, her family goes on a trip to visit relatives. She goes along and I stay 'cause I didn't really mesh with her family, and since they'll be gone a few days, they ask me to put out some candles on the balcony overnight, since they won't be able to. I say sure, and I forgot to do it. Until I woke up around 2 a.m. to a very loud scream and red eyes at our second-story bedroom window. I immediately shot myself and rushed to start lighting candles on the screened porch, turning on all the lights as I went. I swear to God, I saw something rushing back into the tree-line as I started lighting the candles. Story 2. No, I have such a good story. I grew up in a very old house in the UK. I'm talking 1500s old. This house was opposite a really old church, graveyard, and war memorial. Paranormal things happened all the time throughout all of my childhood, so much that I would become desensitized to things like footsteps, whispers, doors opening/closing. The small spooky things used to scare me as a child, but as I became a teenager, those things would be more of an inconvenience, and instead of fear, I'd feel more annoyed, and thus began the weird passive-aggressive relationship between me and the ghosts of my house. I think that the ghosts loved scaring me, but they couldn't anymore, so they really upped their game. About 3 times a week, the lights in the house wouldn't work. 3 different electricians told us that nothing was wrong with our lights. The lights would also miraculously work when the sparkies came. I wasn't a fan of being mugged off by ghosts. They also started waiting for me to walk towards doors and reach for the handles before slamming the doors just before I could open them. This would make me jump, and I could tell they'd enjoy it. So I started kicking doors shut very dramatically before opening them to take away their satisfaction and saying something like, "Saved you a job." Then they would start moving things on tables in front of me, only when I was alone. Typical. It was always things like glasses and mugs, so I'd be worried about them smashing on the floor, so I'd rush to catch them. I think they'd enjoy watching me lunge for the objects. So, I started using only plastic cups. They'd knock the cups off the table and I'd just watch, unamused, and say something like, "Oh, big man," sarcastically. They really began to up their game and started locking doors/rattling doors loudly. I ended up carrying my keys around my house at all times to unlock doors and punching rattling doors and shouting profanities. Unfortunately, me and the ghosts back and forth couldn't last forever, and I eventually had to move to be closer to work. The week before I left, things got crazy. Out of respect, I would act scared at everything as a sort of last hurrah. It was weird having such a weird relationship with something paranormal for so long, then leaving. I sometimes think about the house and wonder how it's doing with the new family in there. I hope it got some good scares. Story 3. Camping at a friend's family property with a group of friends. They had a huge dingy shop full of old tools and old furniture that was super creepy. Dirt floor, clown paintings in the loft. Not even kidding. We stayed up late drinking by the fire, and I was the last one awake. Went to pee on the side of the shop and stood about 5 feet away looking inside through the window. There was a fluorescent light on, and I noticed what looked like a piece of paper or dollar kind of floating around. I thought it was a moth at first, but it was moving in a very flowing figure 8 pattern that was very rhythmic. It reminded me of dangling a carrot. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds, which felt like forever. Then it quickly floated back to the corner of the shop where it was dark. There was also a wood chair near the corner that added to the creepiness. Could have been a month though. I sat back down by the fire to finish my beer and have a smoke. No one else was awake, so I played Robot Unicorn Attack 2 on my phone for a while. I noticed my friend Mark pop out of his tent to pee, then go back and to go to sleep. I decided sleep sounded good, so I went to my tent and fell asleep. The next morning, we were having breakfast and Mark said, "I saw you guys sitting by the fire super late. How late did you stay up?" I told him it was probably 2 or 3 a.m. Then he said, "Who was up with you?" I told him I was the last man standing. He said, "I got up to pee and saw you on your phone and 2 people over your shoulder watching you play." He said one person looked bigger, so he thought it was one of our friends, who was a bigger dude. He said the other person was taller and skinny, but none of us are noticeably tall or skinny. Freaked me out. We still camp at that property once a year, but I don't go to the shop, and I go to sleep whenever my wife decides she's tired. Story 4. This is going to sound silly, but I can't sell you on how real this event was. I was about 9 years old, and I dropped something behind this grand piano my parents had. I tried to get to it for a while and finally prayed, "Lord, give me the strength to move this piano." It was on carpet with no wheels. I literally tried again and picked up this piano and pivoted it like it was a can of soup. I grabbed my toy and placed it back. I was flipping out, I recall. Immediately tried to move it again, and it was back to feeling like it was cemented to the floor. I tried again, then later, then the next day. Never again. It was wild and very real to me. No explanation, and while I am still a believer to this day, I have never been able to request and receive some divine intervention like that, and I defo tried on more serious matters. Not sure if that counts. Story 5. One day, me and some school kids were driving home on a bus, and we were having a discussion about religion and God, and they were all trashing him, saying it was all fake and whatnot. I was never really religious, like actually believing in God at that point, but I was raised like a Christian. But that day I defended religion and said I believed that there was God or something higher than us. I was a bit surprised that I defended God because as teenagers, you get mocked for such a thing easily. Anyway, that same night I was dreaming of something and randomly, like a TV commercial, a voice interrupts the dream. I think it was a female, calling my name gently, telling me to wake up. I woke up and saw a giant spider descending right above my head. I moved just in time and it landed where my face would have been. I really dislike spiders, and one of my worst fears was a spider crawling on my face. Ever since, I believe there is something more than us, or we have senses we don't yet understand. Story 6. I live near a cemetery with a lot of veterans buried there. Occasionally, when I drive past late at night, I can see shadows that look like soldiers, or I hear a group of males talking. One time, I was driving home and literally saw a figure of a soldier run across the street in front of me. It looked like he was holding a weapon and getting ready to aim at something. Nearly crashed into my freaking car. He looked so real. Stayed at a friend's one night for a sleepover in middle school. Woke up in the middle of the night, and when I opened my eyes, I saw a really dark figure standing in the hallway close to her bathroom. I almost crapped myself that night. I managed to go back to sleep, but I never saw it again after that. I've had lots of paranormal experiences, but those are the ones that have stuck with me. Story 7. I think I saw myself as an old man after I died. I know I saw something. I was about 9 or 10, and I woke up from a dead sleep and sat straight up, wide awake. And at the end of my bed was an old man with a short beard, a tweed coat and a hat in one hand, and he was just looking at me. I felt no fear. Nothing in me registered, there's a guy in my room. I felt totally calm, and he patted his hand at me like, lay down now. I did, and I fell asleep. Now, there's zero chance anyone was actually in the house, and no one else ever had any kind of ghostly experience. I suppose there is a chance that it was an extremely vivid and extremely odd dream. But what I've come to think, how many decades later, is that someday I'll die and I'll take a quick peek at young me, just to say, it's going to be okay. I don't know why I think that. It just always seemed true. That old man was me, or will be me. Story 8. Spur of the moment thing, but my son wanted to go to the park around midnight. I know, but hear me out. We both couldn't sleep, and I thought, why not? We went, ran into another family who also was at the park at the same time as us. Their son was around the same age as my son. They were playing together, and we were just talking. They went to the playhouse and screamed at the top of their lungs that there's some kid there with blood all over his face. Recognizing that they were probably just tired or something, we all go sit in the playhouse with them and reassure them it's nothing. Suddenly, they both told us that he's standing right there next to us, and we got freaked out and left when their son said that this bloodied kid apparently was reaching out to us. During this time, her husband was going around the park scanning everything to make sure there actually wasn't a kid there. At this point, we thought it would be a great idea to just go home. We exchanged numbers. Then we just hurried and packed all our belongings to leave. As we were leaving, one of the swings in the swing set started rapidly swinging beyond what the wind could do. No, there was no wind there that night. This individual swing was swinging higher and more aggressively. We all witnessed this and just kind of said, yep, it's time to go. As I'm pulling out of the park, my son starts screaming, he's there, he's coming, mommy. Way to freak out the driver. So I was having an anxiety attack, and I have never pulled out of a parking lot so fast before. Rest of the night, my son clung to me and refused to leave my side for a moment. Safe to say I'm never going back to the park at night anymore. Story 9. I was working on my family genealogy on Ancestry. I'd traced a line back to Boston in the 19th century and was working on a woman and her family who lived there when I got a distinct notion in my head that I was to sit up, stop eating, and treat her family with the proper respect. I'm a bit of a slob, so I was slouching and working on a bag of chips while I browsed through and tried to connect records. I got the distinct impression that this lady didn't like how casually I was handling her family. Also, a couple years back, I was mourning the death of my brother, who died of complications from his diabetes. I was chatting with a friend and got this complete thought in my head from a person I'd never met in life. My grandfather, who had the same name as my brother. He said that he'd met my brother at the gate and that we're going fishing. When I told Mom this, she said that's exactly how her dad would try to spend time and get to know someone. Outdoors, on the water, swatting black flies and telling stories. It's not like having an actual conversation when I receive these impressions. It's more like getting a text message inserted directly into my brain. It's strange and it takes me a moment to figure out what just happened, and it definitely doesn't happen all the time. It's given me some amazing insights from time to time though. Story 10. In 2007, I had gotten a new cell phone and took my old one and just tossed it in a coin jar to die. 8 months or so later, a couple hours after my girlfriend's mom died, we're sitting on the edge of the bed and all of a sudden I hear the clash. And what I really want to know is, should I stay or should I go? Which was my old phone's ringtone. I realized what it was and dug into the coin jar, and the phone was powering down and was too dead to turn back on. Just weird that hours after she died, my phone powered itself on, rang, then powered back down. Then a couple of years later, I had downloaded Ghost Radar by Spudpickle or something for my phone and had it on my desk going when my daughter comes in just in diapers and holding a shirt. She looks at my phone and says, "HEH," pointing at it. She was maybe 2.5, and I said, "It's looking for ghosts," and she handed me the shirt to put on her. It was a purple shirt with a sun that says, "Daddy's Little Sunshine," and she walks out. Then my phone starts talking. Me becoming sunshine. Over the course of 30 seconds or so, I was like, that's weird. So I went into the other room where my mom was on the phone to tell her about it, and my phone said hospital. So when she hung up, I said, "Who is that?" She said, "Uncle Stan. Mom's in the hospital." So I said, "Now I have 2 weird things to tell ya." As I'm telling her, my dad walks past, grabs something and goes into the other room, and I'm telling my mom. It just usually does random words, but that was weird. Then the phone chimes in older. And I said, "See?" Then the phone says cookies. So I look out in the other room. "Hey Dad, what are you eating?" "Chocolate chip cookies." I shut that shit off. Story 11. A few different things. Was going around a corner and up a narrow, rocky part of a mountain trail when a small, dense white cloud suddenly came bouncing down the trail ahead of me and passed right through me, and kept going. Another time in the mountains, I was hiking with a friend when a hermit thrush appeared and led us up the trail for a very long time. It hopped on the ground and chirped and waited for us to catch up before leading us on again. Another time, I walked into a convenience store. I was the only person there besides the cashier. As I walked by a display of 2-liter soda bottles, one of them exploded. Another time I walked into a laundromat, and as I walked past a big dryer which was empty and not running, the glass in the dryer door suddenly shattered in a sort of spider web pattern. That's all I can think of at the moment, but there's more. Story 12. When I was 16 or 17, I was home alone with my little sister. We wanted to do something together, so I went to my room to get something we needed. My sister waited outside my room. My room is at the far end of the hallway, and when standing next to my door, you could peek into the kitchen, which is on the left-hand side on the other end of the hallway. I got what I needed and came back to my sister staring toward the kitchen with a look of absolute horror on her face. I asked her, "What's wrong?" And she, still staring down the hallway, whispered, "There is a man standing in the kitchen." I was extremely alarmed because me and my younger siblings used to have a stalker not too long ago back then, which was why I carried a knife 24/7. So at that moment, the only thing on my mind was, shit, I need to protect my sister. I pulled out my knife, told her to get behind me, and headed inside the kitchen. Yes, I know how absolutely dumb that was. There was no one inside the kitchen. I searched the entire house and found no evidence of anyone besides us having been there at all, luckily. Scared the shit out of me, though. Story 13. I have a haunted house in SC. It's an old plantation house that is abandoned now, but we still own it. One time we heard something jump off of a bed upstairs and footsteps right after, like a dog. But the only dog in the house was right next to my feet. This sound repeated every 10-ish minutes for at least an hour. Only after I checked the room did the sound stop. Another time I was home alone and heard a loud crash, like something got smashed. I ran to the dining room, where I heard the noise, and the giant painting above the fireplace was on the ground very broken. However, the giant nail holding the painting in place was still there, at an upward angle. The string to the painting was still intact. The only way that painting would have fallen is if something picked it up and smashed it. I then thought there was someone in the house, so I called the cops. This giant ex-football SC trooper showed up, tough as nails kind of guy. He searched the house with me, had his gun drawn, and was visibly shaking. He dropped his gun twice, shaking. He left shortly after not finding anyone and floored it out of the driveway. Another time I was lying in bed sick, and there is a closet with an old door handle. It's also really hard to open. It had a giant latch, and the wood door grinds against the floor. So here I am, in bed, and the handle starts turning. The door opens, just a crack, but it opened. I don't know how, but it fucking happened. I ignored it and went to bed, thinking it was a dream and I was just sick dreaming. You know how those dreams can get crazy. Well, I wasn't dreaming because when I woke up, boom, it was still open. The next day, still in bed sick, I remember vividly my right hind trying to strangle me. I know that sounds crazy, but I was choking myself and I couldn't stop. I had to use my left hand to stop myself. Eventually, I regained control of my right arm or hand, but I never forgot what happened. Same room, same bedroom. It was the master bedroom. Another time I remember seeing a young girl walk the halls. She was wearing a blue dress and had blonde hair. She never did anything to me, didn't scare me. She was just there. She disappeared after walking into the green room, a room with green walls. This house has like 5 living rooms. There is also a graveyard next to the property. Over time, the land was sold off, so we don't actually own the graveyard. In the graveyard, there are graves going back to the 1700s, and there is a grave of a baby. Definitely the original owners of the house. We also got shot at by a crazy neighbor one 4th of July. His name was Willie. Why do I know this? He came to our front porch one time, shirtless, to introduce himself. He had a giant scar on his back. He asked us to make sure to put away the lawnmower because people might try to steal it. The lawnmower was on the other side of the property, hidden. The only way he could have known we had one was if he was wandering our property. Anyways, he shot at us, barely missing my brother in the head. Willie's house burned down shortly after, with him in it. We don't go back there anymore. Story 14. My pregnant wife and I were nervously driving to the hospital for an emergency ultrasound as there were some signs that the baby was in distress. A car drove by us outside the hospital with a very distinctive jacket hanging in the window that looked exactly like what my late mother-in-law wore. My wife felt like everything was going to be okay, and it was. My siblings and I were in a realtor's office passing papers after selling my late mother's house. A woman that looked just like her, wearing the same fur coat that my mother wore and the same hairstyle, walked by the window of the office just after we signed. I ran outside and she was gone. Maybe just weird coincidences and not paranormal, but who knows? Story 15. Was delivering newspapers on my paper route when a longtime customer pulled his car next to me and asked me to just give him his daily newspaper now because he was going on a long trip. I handed him his newspaper, then skipped his house as I continued my route. The next day, I was collecting the weekly fees, You used to have to go collect the money back then, no internet payment yet, and I went to his house to collect my fee. His wife answers and promptly complains that I missed her house on my deliveries the day before. I explained to her that her husband pulled up next to me. I told her what he said and that I gave him the paper. She started crying, told me that he had died a couple weeks ago and it was obviously not possible that I spoke with her husband the day before. I know what I saw, and nearly 30 years later, I still think about that situation. I have no way to logically explain what happened, and it still gives me the creeps. Story 16. When I was a teen, I would spend the weekends at my dad's house. There was a CD player in my room that held 3 CDs, and several times a night it would turn on, and it wouldn't ever play music. Just the CD changer would spin. I always felt like someone was watching me in that house. One time I was house sitting while my dad and stepmom were on holiday, and in the middle of the night both the main floor TV and the TV in their locked bedroom turned on, and it was at full volume. Just static. I left and went back to my mom's house because it spooked me out so much. Story 17. I am no stranger to the paranormal, and these are some of the paranormal activities I had witnessed so far. 1. Knocking on the glass. I worked at a foodstuffs distribution company, and I used to scan invoices for the company. As I was working on those invoices, I heard knocking. I stopped, and as I looked there was nobody there, so I continued, and I heard the knocking again. There was nobody there. I asked myself, is there an asshole fooling around? I was wrong. As soon as I heard the third knocking, I ran out of that office and headed straight to the reception area. I told her what I heard and felt. Days after I met the company director and I told him about what I witnessed, and he revealed that a girl died a long time ago. 2. Being watched in the office basement. This happened in the same company I worked for. The company ordered some promotional items, and they arrived at the building. My former manager asked me to check all the promo items as some came up wrong. As I was checking the promo items, I felt that I was being watched by someone or something, but I was sure that I was by myself. I felt uncomfortable. I went back to the office and told my manager that I don't feel comfortable doing the checking. 3. The ghost that I called the ghost magistrate. I now work in the court, and I have been working for almost 2 years. The first month, I was doing the usual office work, and Christmas was at the doorstep. On Christmas Eve, I worked and most of the staff were on leave, and we were quite a few that worked on that day. I was on my own in a part of the court registry, and behind me were shelves full of court cases. As I was doing my job, I felt the feeling that I was being watched. Then I saw the court cases falling on the ground. I was shocked to see what I witnessed. When I told the assistant director, she did not believe me. I gave the entity a name, and it became known as the Ghost Magistrate, as the court cases belonged to the Court of Magistrates. After that first encounter, more events unfolded after that day and the last time. There were lawyers and their clients witnessing the act. Today, the entity still appears from time to time, but not without feeling the drop in temperature. 4. The shadow figure of the university. I was attending a lecture back in December, and we happened to finish earlier than usual. I went to the new building, and between the humanities and the new building, there is an alley. Curiosity gets the best out of me. As I was walking down that alley, I saw a shadow figure running at an unnatural speed. I immediately turned back and went to have a coffee. I told this story to my colleague, and he revealed that near that alley, bodies are stored for research purposes. That is all the paranormal activities I had witnessed so far. Story 18. I was babysitting my friend's brother, 3 years old, with my friend. We were 14 years old. Her grandpa just died, but we didn't know yet. At one point, we hear her brother talking, so we go into his room. He is standing in his bed, one of those with bars around it, and is talking to the dark corner of his room. We asked him, "Hey, sweetie, did you have a bad dream? Who are you talking to?" He says, "Grandpa." We told him that Grandpa wasn't here, but he could tell him his story the next day. He said, "No, Grandpa is here." The next day we heard that Grandpa had died. Story 19. When I was maybe 6 or 7, I lived with my grandma in a double wide. You could sit on the living room couch and see all the way down the hallway. You'd see my bedroom doorway, the bathroom doorway, and then my grandma's bedroom doorway. Anyways, my grandma decided she wanted to play hide and seek for whatever reason. I saw her, clear as day, turn the corner and run into the bathroom. The bathroom door was in the middle of the hallway before the bedroom. I ran into the bathroom after her, turned the lights on, and didn't see her. I pull back the shower curtain. She's not there. There's literally nowhere else to hide. It was a small-ass fucking trailer. At this point, I get really freaked out and sad and start to cry. I backed up, facing the bathroom doorway until I hit the living room couch. I called out to my grandma a few times, no answer. This was super fucking weird for her. She never ever let me cry. My eyes flashed to the bedroom doorway for a second, and my fucking grandma is standing there with this face that just put a pit in my stomach. Except she's not, because I hear her start talking from the bathroom, apologizing for making me cry, and asking why I didn't come look for her. While she's talking, the fucking bedroom lights flickered on and off, the bedroom doorway is empty, and my grandma walked out of the bathroom. I brought it up so many times, and until the day she died, she swore that I never came to look in the shower for her, that she was never in the bedroom, and that she'd never played a trick on me. She never once made me cry in my life, and I don't think she was the one who made me cry that day either. I'll never forget it. Seems silly now that it's all typed out. Such a silly thing to remember. Story 20. Lived in a house that had many activities, from seeing ghosts to being able to hear their conversations. Many people who visit the house for the first time without being told it is haunted will tell me they can see a ghost clear as day or be able to hear them like I can. Personally can't see them, but I can hear their conversation like a distant whisper. The worst activity in the house is when a battery-operated toy like Hug and Elmo kind started to talk without being played with. There was a group of us in the room. Most people panicked, and I picked up the toy and took out the battery, and the toy kept on lighting up and saying creepy shit like "I love you" and hugging me. Story 21. I've had two. First was most recent, give or take 2009/2010. The house I lived in was for sure haunted. I would hear knocking above my bedroom coming from the attic. Every time I went to check, there was nothing there. And it wasn't as if it was something banging against the ceiling on a windy day, because it happened on absolutely mild days also. It was always 3 distinct knocks, similar to ones you see in movies. I kind of talked myself into not believing it to be paranormal until my mate, his girl, and their toddler were sleeping in the room next to mine. I woke up the next morning to find them sleeping in the living room. Apparently something had tried to attack the child at night. So yeah, shit was haunted. I lived in the UK at the time, so go figure. Second is something that has been told to me multiple times, but I remember vaguely because I was like 5. I was in Pakistan, in the back of a truck/van. The back door of the van/truck was broken, so it wouldn't stay locked. This is an important part of the story. So, I remember falling asleep in my aunt's lap. I remember closing my eyes and being in the back of the van or truck. When I woke up, her and I were sitting in the exact same position, in the middle of a busy intersection. It was like we had been lifted out of the van and just plopped in the middle of the intersection. Neither one of us felt it, as you usually or hopefully would if you fell out of a moving van or truck. I don't remember much else from the experience. The driver stopped the van or truck once they noticed we weren't in the back, but on the fucking floor. We were surrounded by people just staring at us in disbelief. If I had not been told this story multiple times by different people, I wouldn't believe the story either. But it happened and I can't really explain either one of those stories away. Story 22. I was driving home with an expected arrival of 45 minutes. Time was 6:45 p.m. I found myself pulling into the driveway with no recollection of the drive itself. Puzzled, I looked at the clock. 6:50 p.m. Even more puzzled, I checked my playlist, the one I play for that 45-minute drive. Exactly 5 minutes of the playlist had played, literally only one song. Yet I couldn't remember it. I opened the door and the family was just as surprised as me, saying, "Damn, how fast were you going?" Judging the highway and side roads and intersections, I needed to have gone nearly 100 to 300 miles per hour running everything to accomplish this 5-minute drive. Yet gas usage and mileage of the trip read average a 5-minute drive at 65 to 70 miles per hour. My parents joke that I had found a portal. I'm quite willing to believe them. Story 23. When I was 18, 2008, a friend and I took a road trip from Northern California to International Falls, Minnesota. It was a long drive and we were broke, so we tried to make it as fast as possible. Our goal was 2 days to make the 2,015-mile drive. Toward the end of day 2, we had been driving for about 20 hours and had about 2 left. We were in the middle of nowhere at about 2 a.m. when we saw this bright blue light way off in the distance. We thought somebody had been pulled over or something, kinda looked like blue police lights and really bright. The light seemed impossibly far though and took forever for us to come across. When we got to the light, it wasn't a car. There was a woman standing in the middle of a creek with some crazy bright blue light all around her. She was just standing there, in the middle of nowhere, in far northern Minnesota. It was the most bizarre thing I had ever seen. The light seemed to be emanating from her. It freaked us out, so we just hurried away. We didn't talk about it the rest of the trip and eventually lost contact. I messaged him about it a couple of years back because it had always stuck with me and wanted to make sure it wasn't a dream. Turns out he remembered the same thing and said he wished he forgot. I looked into it further and found out that a flood had washed away a small town a bunch of years ago and resulted in many people dying. We're not the only ones to see what we saw that night. Story 24. I worked at a 100-year-old hotel for about 4 years. This was a pretty massive hotel, and it has had its share of deaths. It has been featured on a few ghost television shows, and we would get people doing a CA ghost tour during the summer months with their kids. There was one death that was more famous than others among staff and guests. A little girl and her mother were caught in a fire on the 7th floor in the 60s, and both of them had died. There was a ghost handprint stain on one of the wood paneling that had been attempted to be buffed out and removed over the years, but it just won't go away. So the little girl was our main ghost celebrity. As a bartender, I wasn't allowed past the floors with bars. We had 3 bar venues, so I had never made my way up to the 7th floor. However, one night a nice couple came in right as I was finishing up and asked if I could bring up a bottle of wine. I said sure. Easy tip. And when asking the room, they were in 714, the room in which the little girl had passed away. I was stoked. Finally my chance. I asked for my manager's elevator key to go up, and I told him, I hope something happens. I took the bottle up, and of course nothing happened. Bummed, I reached in the beer fridge to pour out a mispoured beer from hours earlier, and this is what was waiting for me. Story 25. About 35 years ago, me and my younger brother were in my attic bedroom. About a quarter of it was blocked off and was used for storing my dad's old tools and other stuff. One day we opened the door just to have a bit of a nose when our cat decided to go in. After about 5 minutes of trying to coax the cat out, we decided to go in and get it. The room we went in was about 10 feet by 20 feet and was pitch black except for the bit of light coming in from the main bedroom. Anyway, I crawled to the far side looking for the cat when I noticed a bit of light coming through the floor. When I got over to the light, I looked down and there was a guy on some stepladders working on a light switch, white t-shirt, blue dungarees. I started backing up quietly thinking it was a hole through to the shop next door. I didn't go in again until the people in the shop moved out and it was empty for a while. It was then we got the idea of going through the hole and having a snoop around the now empty shop. When we went to where the hole was, there was nothing, no hole. No sign there was ever any kind of hole there, nothing. I've no idea what we saw, but I still think of it all the time. Story 26. This isn't as crazy as other stories here, but one night, a total skeptic, was out with a group of friends and had met a woman in the group earlier in the evening. We kissed and cuddled up a bit at the bar. She was drunk, I wasn't. Anyway, we went to an all-night restaurant with everyone. I have my arm around her back, and she has her hand on my thigh. She started rubbing it, and even though she was plastered, she suddenly became clear and aware and said, "Did you have a baby sister who died?" I was absolutely stunned, because yes, I did. I hadn't even alluded to this at all that night. Being skeptical, I asked her how she died. She said breathing. It had to do with breathing. Again, floored. She had been strangled. I asked her if she was picking anything else up, and she said, not really. Maybe just the number 3. She was the 3rd child. Then, she went back to being drunk, affectionate, and a jockey. WTF. I've never had another experience like that. Story 27. A few years ago, my sister and I moved back home due to the pandemic. We'd both work at our desks upstairs across the hall from one another. One day, she had left to go on a run like usual. Maybe an hour later, I see her walk into the room across the hall as I'm still at my desk. I say hello and ask her how the run was. When she doesn't respond, I walk over into her room because maybe she didn't hear me. I walk into a completely empty room. She hasn't come home yet. A little creeped out, I move my laptop downstairs and sure enough, 20 minutes later, she gets home. I asked if she made a quick stop back, but she hadn't. It happened one other time that summer. Same seeing her go into her room. I follow, no one home. Story 28. I went to a supposed haunted location. It used to be a Catholic school in West Virginia. I was with my ex-boyfriend at the time. I got really, really bad vibes. I couldn't stand to be there. I even threw up. My ex, unbeknownst to me, picked up a brook. The place had burned down. When we got back home, he gave me the brick. He was a skeptic and said he thought I'd love it. He put it on top of the entertainment center. One night, we were watching an episode of X-Files on DVD. Damn thing threw itself across the room, hit the wall, damaged it. I was scared to death, and so was my ex. He took the brick, and there was a creek behind our apartment. He threw it in the creek. We figured that was the end of it, and went about our lives. We went to work a few days later. The brick was on the patio. At that point, my ex was visibly worried. He put it in his truck bed and drove several hours to return it to the rightful place. He was never a skeptic again. Story 29. There is an area near where I grew up. They say the place is haunted, and I can tell you that I did not believe in ghosts until I went there. When you enter the woods, everything goes quiet. No birds, planes, cars in the distance. That's when creepy stuff happens. I went 3 times with friends. The first was at night, and we heard screams off in the distance, but it was really hard to tell where. All of our flashlights died, and it was almost impossible to get back to our cars. Another time was during the day, and after it went quiet, we heard what sounded like heavy footsteps heading towards us, but we did not see anything. Once it was in closer distance, we ran back to the cars. The last was at night. We were determined to figure this place out, and again most of our flashlights died. We heard what sounded like an animal being killed, but it was maybe 10 feet in front of us. Some of us hear voices in the distance. We stayed on the path, but on our way back trees were laying in the path that were not there before. It's called Dudleytown, and the shit still scares the hell out of me. Story 30. My grandfather had a strange experience shortly after my grandmother died. My dad had asked my granddad for a few of his mom's things to remember her, by which were sentimental. So my granddad started collecting them to give to my dad. He found the things requested, but couldn't find this specific clay pot my dad had made for my grandma when he was at school for Mother's Day. He looked for several days, but couldn't find it and gave up. He later went to sleep and had a dream where my grandma told him to check the black lining. Then a few weeks went by, and he was clearing away some of my grandma's things, and he stumbled across some of her old handbags. He opened them up to see what was inside, and found the small clay pot hidden in a handbag with a black lining. Story 31. My mom is from Connecticut, and 2 of her cousins had the Warrens come over to inspect their homes. One had the ghost of a Korean war soldier. When the television was off, they could sometimes see a face on the screen, and there was errant shouting coming through the walls at night. They didn't have any neighbors close by. Her other cousin was visited by a young girl who, they think, died of a fever in the early 1900s. Her experience was a bit more pleasant. She would hear the sound of a ball bouncing down the hallway floor, followed by giggling. She never felt anything nefarious during the events. I'm a lapsed Catholic, but my mom's side of the family, at the time, was still quite steeped in Catholicism. They wanted to have their homes investigated to be sure they weren't dealing with anything demonic. Apparently, the Warrens deemed both were harmless visitations. The cousin with the war soldier did have a priest over, just to bless the house, and things calmed down after. The other cousin moved a year or so later and just lived with the occasional visits. I'm an atheist, so I'm on the fence about all of this. I completely believe both events, but I don't know how or if the church could have helped. My mother's side of the family has strong roots in Connecticut and Massachusetts, and she said some of the women may have been accused of witchcraft in the late 1600s. A part of me thinks the females in my family might be a sort of friendly conduit for lost entities who need safe harbor. A bit silly, I know, coming from a skeptic, but I do feel a strong connection with the Warren movie franchise. Story 32. I dated this girl years ago. We'd normally hang at her place. We had a couple paranormal experiences together there. Small things at first. Maybe something falling off a shelf, or you'd hear a ball rolling in the room upstairs. One night I was helping them paint a stairway. The TV was playing in the bedroom at the top of the stairs. It was one of those chunky old TVs, mounted on a swivel arm in the corner of the room. No one was upstairs. Out of nowhere, the TV changed to loud static. I went up to investigate and saw the TV was turned basically 90 degrees, now facing the adjacent wall. Maybe the mount was loose. I don't know. It seemed pretty sturdy and the TV was heavy. not easy to move. But wait, there's more. Her niece and nephew would regularly visit. On more than one occasion, they would come out of their bedroom crying, talking about some man in their room scaring them. They would describe him as being tall and dark, wearing a black trench coat, a top hat, and he had a gun. These kids would even draw him. Freaky, right? Well, one night as I was leaving, I was standing on the front stoop facing the house, saying goodbye. I could see the back of the house through the storm door window. Before the hug goodbye, I shifted my weight from right to left, and as I did so, glanced into the house, and I fucking saw this huge shadowy figure in the rear of the house. I did a double take, and she started to freak out after I explained what I saw. Absolutely wild. Story 33. I have had a couple that I have questioned, but I am certain of this one. DH and I lost our first dog sooner than expected. We were devastated, of course. Once we received the cremains, we sealed them and his collar and favorite toys in a container and buried them. It was probably a month or two later. It's been a bit, so I cannot recall. We were getting ready to go to work. I was in the bathroom doing makeup and DH was about 10 feet from me in the bedroom. I heard our dog's favorite toy squeak. Obviously, not possible, sensei. He was gone and we buried that toy. So, I dismissed it as my brain going wonky. However, DH walks up to me and says, did you hear that? He most definitely visited us. Story 34. I guess this counts as paranormal. Well, this happened last fall, and I was on a road trip through Utah and Arizona and Nevada. So after visiting the north rim of the Grand Canyon, I headed east and took Highway 163 through Monument Valley. What a scenic road. Highly recommend. And went past Forrest Gump Hill but didn't stop and stayed in a funky little motel in Mexican Hat, Utah. Except for the beautiful scenery, it was very uneventful. So next morning, I decided to head back to FG Hill for some pictures and after accomplishing that task, head back towards Mexican Hat. Now, before you arrive in Mexican Hat, you navigate a very curvy road down to the San Juan River and cross a one-way bridge with stop lights, then back up the valley to the town. I would say it's about 20 miles. So I'm loddy-daging back and I'm driving and become aware that it's taking too long to get to Mexican Hat. There's no obvious paved roads to mistakenly turn off, but I do turn on a road to see WTF is happening. I turn around and come to the stop sign and see the sign on Highway 163 pointing back the way I just came towards Mexican Hat. I somehow missed it. I remember nothing about the curvy road to the river, one-way bridge, or the town itself. I mean, holy shit. What's going on? Never had anything like that happen before or since and have no explanation. Yeah, I guess I could have just spaced it out, but it's a great road, so I was paying attention. Probably about 30 minutes worth of road, and town I have no recollection of. Oh, for a dashcam, though, I'm sure there's a rational explanation for it. It's a perfect landscape for alien activity down there. Hell, maybe I'm not even me typing this out. Maybe the real me is in a zoo on their home plant. Story 35. I live in the middle of nowhere, Texas. Neighbor has a monster telescope. He's a retiree, and it's like his life. I was interested when he told me to come check it out when Mars, the Moon, and Jupiter were in a row. It was really cool. Could actually see the red dot on Jupiter. Anyways, he asked if I wanted to see something, which really blew my mind. He hooked up the night vision lens. After about 5 minutes, it was cool to really see planes coming into Austin Airport. But then he zoomed out. Man, I don't know what the fuck is going on up there. But it's like an interglacial highway. Don't ask me to describe it. just some really odd-shaped craft. He said it was at the edge of our atmosphere about 80 miles up. Either we got some crazy shit they aren't telling us about, or I don't know WTF. Basically anyone can see it with the right equipment. I don't know why there hasn't been more reporting on this. Story 36. The house I lived at in college used to be a funeral home before it was converted to student housing 20 years ago. I was staying in the house alone during spring break, and I decided to play some Xbox. Now, the PlayStation was plugged in at the time, and the outlet to switch them was underneath a little coffee table under the TV. I bent down to switch them, and when I turned back around to get out from under the table, I saw what looked like the outline or shape of a human being with no face running out of my kitchen and straight at me. I closed my eyes and screamed out because I legitimately thought that I was being attacked by a burglar, but when I opened my eyes, the thing was gone. I had never believed in ghosts in my entire life until this happened to me. I called up my roommate and I drove an hour to his family's house and stayed the night there because I was so freaked out. Story 37. Years ago, I was in school and I told a friend about a dream I had. He told me he had a similar dream. It was something about ashes or whatever. I talked to another friend of mine and then acquaintances until I talked to everyone in my year. Small class, small school, 20 people per year. Every single one of us had some strange, blurry dream about ashes. It was really strange because there were a couple other common themes throughout these dreams, like some red pencil or something. We all were interested, but stopped questioning it eventually. Story 38. I've had several. The most jaw-dropping, obvious experience where I could not explain it away and I knew I wasn't crazy and was haunted happened after I participated in a paranormal investigation. I did not really experience anything at the house. I took pictures throughout the basement, and when I was leaving I saw a kitty in the upstairs window and OFC went, "Ooh, kitty," and took a picture of it. I got home and looked at the pictures. I noticed in the basement there were a lot of orb pictures, which was not surprising because I thought it was dust. However, I did notice in one of the orb pictures there was a big orb and a little orb next to it. I got to the picture of the cat. Guess what is right next to the cat in the window? A big orb and a little orb. Going home, I didn't feel anything was off. I just went home. Pretty soon after that, I started seeing a little boy and a man. It was always fleeting. Boy peeking around corners. Seeing glimpses of a blonde man in his 30s. Hearing someone standing in the kitchen, even his jeans rubbing together, or hearing would creak under his weight. One time he stood behind me doing dishes, and I felt like someone was standing behind me. I'd look quickly to the right behind me and see a blur moving the other way. Look left, and the same thing blur to the right. This was all well and good. I was kind of freaked out, but I'd had experiences prior, so had no idea what his intentions were. Then it got real late at night when my toddler sons were sleeping upstairs. I was downstairs in the living room staying up gaming probably. I hear one scream and then sob while running all the way downstairs. 30 seconds later, the same thing happened to my younger son. This has never happened in all of my years parenting and has not happened again, so it was not normal. They never had nightmares or not ones that made them wake up screaming and sobbing, then running from the room. I was so filled with fury and wanting to protect my sons, I stood at the bottom of the stairs to their room and I tore him a new one, calling him POS and telling him to leave my kids the fuck alone. That I was well aware I couldn't do anything about it, but I'd make sure he'd regret it somehow. Then I had a moment where I gaslit myself and audibly told myself I was probably crazy and it was nothing. Next day I got my answer. I was sitting downstairs with my sons in the living room. No one else was home. No access to my second floor than the stairs right in my view. I was sitting on the floor with them and heard a very loud, slow walk across the second floor. Very, very loud footsteps with boots. Interestingly enough, the floor was carpeted, but the sound was loud like boots walking on wood. The feeling right after was just complete and utter shock. I'd always had suspicions. I had seen lots of brief stuff, but I'd gaslight myself and say I wasn't seeing what I was seeing. But that was so blatant there was no other explanation. I don't second-guess myself anymore when I experience stuff now. I think I'm at least clairaudient because I can hear them more than I can see them. Sometimes in an empty house you hear a group of people talking. I can hear them standing for long periods of time, periodically shifting their weight, and can hear the floor creak and their clothing rub. When my brother passed in 2004, I actually heard him whisper my name several times. I saw his shadow in the doorway that night, and he slowly walked over to me and leaned down. I pretended like I was sleeping because I was so afraid. He ended his life in a prison cell with an overdose of depression meds. I was part of the reason why he was there because I testified against him. I was afraid he was going to be angry. He could be very volatile and frequently had anger outbursts and could be violent. We had a love-hate relationship. I've never regretted anything more in my entire life than not getting the answer to everything and acknowledging him. I know a little about attachments. Not enough, obviously. I know he was attached to me for a while, but I think he passed over. The only reason I think this is because my daughter said she had a dream of him coming to her at a playground. She said they talked and he was nice. It broke me, and nothing has effed me up more in my life than losing my brother. The grief never really goes away. I've been listening to NDE podcasts, and it's been helping. When he passed, I binge-watched Dead Like Me, and it was awesome to help me process all that. I work in behavioral health now in a crisis center where my brother should have gone instead of prison. It doesn't pay much, but I owe it to him to make sure other people have a chance because he never did. Story 39. I actually have another to share. My father purchased some rural property about 12 years ago that has a cemetery on site. Descendants of the family are allowed to come and visit the property annually, which is really weird since about a dozen really old people led by a guy in his 50s show up and venture out into the woods. Anyway, when we were looking at the land prior to purchasing, my brother, my father, and myself went to walk it. We took random pics of the landscape, ponds, etc. Upon reviewing the pics we took, this one shows up, I'll share. Unequivocally, this dude was not with us. That is my brother and father in the background, 6 foot tall for reference. There is no misunderstanding or misrecalling the day. We absolutely freaked out. We contacted those Texas ghost hunter people and they were intrigued, but nothing really came of it. Never saw the little guy again. He doesn't even look real. Like he's superimposed on the ground or something. Anyway, it's a strange piece of land, 14 marked graves, and according to the relatives, about 40 slaves were buried out there who worked the land in the late 1800s.